Great. So hello and thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. It's really great to see some familiar names and lots of people. So really thank you for tuning into this important discussion about access to Trikafta. I'm Kelly Grover and I'm the CEO of Cystic Fibrosis Canada. And tonight I'm joined by two very special guests for a discussion on Trikafta's position in the Canadian political environment and how you can advocate to get Trikafta into the hands of those who need it. Joining us tonight is Michelle McLean, Senior Vice President, National Health and Wellness Sector at Hill & Knowlton. Michelle is an expert in public affairs and government relations within the context of the Canadian health sector and a great friend of CF Canada. And we're also joined by Patty Tweed, Manitoba Provincial Advocate for the Cystic Fibrosis Canada National Advocacy Network. Patty is a CF parent and a wonderful champion for change for our community. Michelle and Patty, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Before we begin, I do have a few housekeeping items. In the first half of tonight's webinar, we're going to hear from our panelists, and then we'll turn to you and respond to the questions that you've given us, some of you in advance, so thank you for that. And others of you may have questions that you think of as you hear the speakers, so please use the Q&A function on your control panel and put the question there. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our website, YouTube channel, and our social media channels. I also want to take a quick moment to thanks to our donors whose generous contributions help make our work possible. And importantly, a really big thank you to all of our volunteers whose continued time and commitment help us make needed change for our CF community. And with that, Michelle will now provide us with an overview of our Canadian political environment, what it means for the CF community, and what it means for access to cystic fibrosis modulators like Trikafta.
Great, thanks, Kelly. I hope everyone can see the slides. Thank you, Kim, for helping me to run these slides. It will be easier for me to present while you're looking after advancing the slides. So thank you so much for the invitation, Kelly and team, to join this evening. For those that don't know me, I've been working in public affairs for almost 20 years, and a lot of that time is spent on patient advocacy. And I've worked with CF Canada over the past several years on this issue and others. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion tonight and your questions. Kim, you can go ahead and you can advance. So there are four main things that I'm going to touch on. Just an update on where Trikafta sits in the review process now, so you have a sense of what's next. Then, as Kelly said, I'm going to review the political environment and how it affects the journey that Trikafta is on. And then touch on what are those advocacy opportunities? What can you do to really influence when these modulators like Trikafta come to market, and some of the keys to success. So where is Trikafta now? I understand in a previous webinar that you've covered what is a pretty complex regulatory system. Kim, if you go to the next slide. Yep, you can go just advance one more. Great. As many of you know, Health Canada review priority review was begun in December of late last year. That was a huge milestone for the community. I don't need to explain to all of you what the journey was to even reach that point. And I want to commend this community and specifically CF Canada for pushing to ensure that that drug was submitted to Health Canada for review. As you know, the manufacturer had some concerns about the regulatory environment, and your voice was so important in flagging to the government the concerns, but also the manufacturer. So that review from Health Canada, which really its purpose is to review for safety and efficacy, that's likely to be done by the end of June. And there's a new review process so that the CADTH review, which is another federal body that's going to review the drug and provide a cost-benefit analysis, again, we'll do the review in parallel to Health Canada so that we'll have both recommendations in June. And CF Canada, of course, submitted on behalf of the community their submission to CADTH in February. So what happens next? Once the recommendations are made from Health Canada and CADTH, It then goes to a provincial body called the Pan-Canadian Pricing Alliance, PCPA. And really, that is the body that negotiates the price with the manufacturer, understanding that at the federal PMPRB, which I know this community is very familiar with, sits a ceiling. The actual list price is going to be negotiated between the provinces and territories and the manufacturer by PCPA. But that's not the end of the journey for drugs in Canada. So once a price is agreed between the provinces, the territories, and the manufacturer, each individual jurisdiction then decides whether they will make that drug available and under what conditions, essentially to whom. So it's not a short process, it's a complex process. And I want to point out that it's been intentionally structured at arm's length from political decision makers. And that's a very intentional design, because years ago, government felt that true experts should be involved with the review, but they also recognized that they should stay at arm's length from some of these reimbursement and listing decisions. That isn't to say that you don't have an opportunity to influence government in terms of that reimbursement decision. And we'll talk a little bit about how that can come to pass. So on the next slide, I'll start to review the political environment and how that really impacts drug review and some of these listing decisions. Thanks, Kim. So listen, not a surprise to anyone on the call tonight that governments across the country are focused on the pandemic response and economic recovery. For most governments, honestly, it's their sole focus. This is a crisis that's unprecedented in our generation, and frankly, it's a whole of government response. So governments have little ability to deal with anything that's outside of a pandemic response and economic recovery, and that's where the entire focus is. In the past several months, you've seen that political focus and discussion shift to vaccine distribution. And of course, Canada's lagging the world and some of our peer countries in rolling out the vaccine, which is causing no shortage of headaches at both the federal and provincial level. Fortunately, the vaccine distribution will now pick up. So I expect that some of the political pressure governments have been under will start to recede in some ways. But remember, just delivering the vaccine is only half the challenge. That was really sort of the focus of the federal government. Now the provinces have to get it into arms, and it's a huge logistical challenge. So politically, that's where the focus is. The other thing to note is that we expect a federal election this year. As you may know, we are in a minority parliament meeting. There is no one party that has the majority of seats in the House of Commons. And those minority parliaments don't tend to last a full 4 years. The expectation is that we'll have a federal election this year. I would say that the pundits are split on whether it will be a spring election or a fall, with a lot of people saying that if the pandemic, if the vaccine rollout, picks up and the polling numbers rebound for the Liberals, that they may trigger a May or June election. That's important to us because, of course, if the federal government is going to go back to the polls, it means all the parties will be thinking about what platform commitments are they going to make. And you can expect that pharmacare and access to drugs will be addressed by all the parties. What's interesting now, of course, that didn't exist in the pre-pandemic is a real public understanding of what waiting for drugs actually means. The patient community knew that issue well, but until the pandemic arrived and Canadians started to realize they were waiting longer than other countries for vaccines, I don't know that the public really understood those issues the way you did. They do now. And so there's an opportunity in the upcoming election to really grab onto this issue of what should Canadians expect in terms of access to new therapies. So something to keep in mind, and I'll come back to that. In terms of, if an election was held tomorrow, the Liberals still enjoy the support of majority of Canadians. Kim, if you just go back, sorry, one slide. So they're sitting about 35%. They're not within yet majority territory, but as we've seen in the other two provincial elections that have taken place through the pandemic, incumbents enjoy the advantage. And I expect the polling numbers for the Liberals to go up if they continue to be able to secure vaccines. So I think you can expect the Liberals to secure another term. And the question is, of course, whether it'll be Liberal or majority or minority. Now, the Conservatives, of course, are hoping to break through with a new leader. Unfortunately for them, currently, their leader isn't polling very well. So they're working hard at that. And you may have seen some of the videos that are introducing Mr. O'Toole to Canadians because he's not well known. Federal provincial tensions over healthcare transfers. A very timely point on this slide, given that several of the premiers today had held a joint virtual press conference reiterating their expectations around increase in healthcare transfers to the provinces. They currently sit about 22%. The provincial governments have indicated to the federal government that they'd like that to increase to 35%. That's a $28 billion jump, and is no surprise to anyone. The Prime Minister has resisted that. And we won't have clarity about what the federal government will be doing on healthcare transfers, at least until the budget, which we don't expect until April. And even then, I expect that there'll still be some question marks. But that's a huge focus of the premiers right now, is to increase their healthcare transfers from the federal government. The other thing that's important to note is Ontario and Quebec will have an election next year. So why is that important? Why am I talking about it now? Well, like most political parties, they'll go into a full year in the run up to that election in pre-election positioning. So they'll be appealing to the electorate. They'll be floating new policy ideas, their positioning. So there's a traction you can have in a lead up to an election that's really important when it comes to some of the issues that we're talking about tonight in terms of access to Trikafta. Kim, next slide. So I just wanted to briefly touch on the Minister of Health priorities at the federal level. Obviously, as I said, Health Canada and the minister completely consumed with the pandemic response and all of the gaps that the pandemic have revealed. So whether it's long-term care, seniors' health, access to primary health care, mental health services, the government is seized really with managing and starting to address some of those gaps in our healthcare system. I'm going to touch more on the next slide on this question of pharmacare because it is directly related to the topic of access to modulators. So maybe I think on the next slide, I dive into it, Kim. So many of you will be familiar with the Liberal commitment to pharmacare. It was made in 2019, which feels like a long time ago. And there were three pillars the government identified for pharmacare, and that was a rare disease strategy for high cost drugs, a national formulary, and a Canadian drug agency. But underpinning all of that, and again, I won't spend a lot of time on it because I know your community knows it well, were the PMPRB changes. Now, what's interesting about the proposed changes, which will set and regulate pricing in Canada, is they were to come into effect July 1st of last year, 2020. And the government delayed the implementation once and then a second time. And of course, the reason they've given for those delays is a pandemic, uncertainty, mindful that it's a big shift for industry. But really, I believe, and we've had some Liberals off the record confirm that patient advocacy played a big role in the decision of government to delay those changes, given that there was a strong voice from patients, that there were real concerns, that those changes would create barriers to access. And your community knows that well. I will congratulate you on really punching above your weight. I understand there were over 900 letters submitted to PMPRB from the community. And I want you to know that in Ottawa, it made an impact. And I think it's a great example of the power of patient advocacy. On the next slide, I think it's important to situate the government's commitment to national pharmacare in the broader context of what the provinces want. So again, the federal government can't create that type of program and simply roll it out. They have to negotiate with the provinces. Before the pandemic, it wasn't high on many premiers' priority list. They frankly had other pressures on the system that were higher on their list. Well, not surprisingly, now that a year into a pandemic, it's fallen further down their priority list. And as I said, today they reiterated a call for $28 billion. And many of the provinces, Quebec, BC, feel they already have a pharmacare program within their province. So it remains a real question what that tension is going to be and whether the government can bring the provinces to the table. On the next slide, I'm going to touch on the first pillar of those three ways that the government wanted to advance national pharmacare. So they have said, we need a strategy for drugs for rare diseases. They're very expensive. And as a country, we don't have a consistent way of dealing with them and ensuring access for patients. So they've launched consultations. They launched in January. They close at the end of March. Dr. Eric Hoskins, those of you in Ontario will know him well. He led the task force that looked at pharmacare originally. He's leading some of the consultations on drugs for rare diseases. And the government intends by the end of the year to roll out this strategy and point to it as the first step towards a national pharmacare program. Now, experts in the field will tell you that there are only a few parallels between a full national pharmacare and a rare disease strategy, but the government is sort of politically positioning it as integral to a pharmacare system. So, but there are a lot of questions, and the consultation paper, which you can find online if you're interested on Health Canada's website, does a lot to address the question of managing costs of expensive new drugs. But I think the patient community would feel that the same attention wasn't paid to ensuring access and really noting the value of these drugs as often as the costs are noted. So I think there's still a lot of advocacy work for the patient community on this file to educate government that we cannot see drugs for rare diseases as a financial challenge to be managed. It should be a question of how we bring these therapies as quickly, as fairly to Canada's patients as we can. So I think there's certainly room, and I'll touch on it later in terms of advocacy opportunities for you to share your point of view. So some questions. Obviously, an election is going to come in the middle of this policy development cycle. So that may affect how quickly the government can roll it out, but also they have to have buy-in from the provinces. And so again, there's a real wild card when you have many of the provinces not on board. As I've said here, cost containment versus ensuring access, where government puts the emphasis in this strategy is going to be key for patient groups and many other stakeholders. So encourage you, and you'll hear later in the presentation, to get involved. On the next slide, I wanted to touch briefly in terms of what are the other levels of government really dealing with in terms of competing priorities. We know that access to therapies is a huge priority for our community, but what else are health ministers dealing with across the country? Well, this is a laundry list, and it wouldn't be everything on their list, but certainly long-term care and seniors care would not have been a political challenge or at top of a political priority list, but the pandemic has shone a light on the changes that need to happen in that sector. And it's going to require a significant investment, and that'll be on the minds of a lot of premiers. Governments have talked about not finding ourselves in the same position. So public health, emergency preparedness, we're going to see governments invest certainly over the next several years in a way they have not in many, many years. Mental health, which of course was emerging as a public health priority, has again vaulted to the top of the list given the impact of this pandemic. And there are more things here. I include them only to illustrate the number of demands that governments are balancing at any one time, and certainly through a pandemic. So the importance of your voice to ensure that our issue doesn't get lost as they're balancing all of these demands is so critically important. So advocacy opportunities, I've touched on it several times, and I want to reiterate, it is not a common occurrence to see a small patient community achieve what your community has in the past 18 months. You are all to be congratulated for your efforts and the passion that you brought to the conversations around PMPRB and making modulators available to your patient communities, and particularly on Trikafta. But there are so many other things that you can do and that must be done to ensure that these drugs reach Canadian patients. The first place I would direct you is the Take Action page on CF Canada's website. There are wonderful toolkits there that are so helpful. It'll give you the documents you need to really share your voice and your point of view in a way that builds a critical mass. So encourage you to go there and join the advocacy network that's organized. This is a mighty army of voices that have really made a difference and show no signs of slowing down. I know that Patty's going to talk a little bit more about that after me. There are so many ways that you can share your voice, whether you're meeting with politicians or you're in a provincial capital or in Ottawa. You can do that through social media, but as I say, there are so many ideas and helpful tools on the website. Patty, I think, is going to speak about the spring meetings coming up with provincial politicians. I've highlighted the consultations that are underway for the Drugs for Rare Disease strategy. I know that CF Canada will be participating. And don't forget, an election year is a wonderful time to engage politicians. They need your vote. They will meet with you as a constituent. And so I encourage you, your voice matters, and never more so than during an election year. So use those opportunities to engage politicians. And finally, I wanted to share with you some things that I've learned over the years, working almost 20 years in government relations. And the first is share your personal story. Your story can make a difference. I have seen politicians move to tears after patients have shared the stories of the struggles and what their families are facing. And it humanizes a problem that they may have only ever read about. So share your story. It does make a difference. There is strength in numbers. Join forces with CF Canada. This isn't a big patient population the way you might see in cancer or some of the other big chronic diseases. So building a critical mass of voice is very effective when it comes to influencing government. One of the things that we talk to clients and people about all the time is be consistent in what you're saying to government. And that's where those toolkits and being part of a larger effort comes to bear. Drugs, your message, of course, that drugs must be funded quickly and comprehensively, but communicating that in a consistent way allows government to stay focused on the solution and not be distracted by difference of opinion on policy matters. Contact and meet with your local politician. All politics is local at the end of the day. You've probably heard that saying, but it's very true. And as I say, in an election year, no more so than, so meet with your politicians. They will meet with you and they need to hear the story that you have to share. The other thing I wanted to share with you tonight is to never give up. Persistence wins the day. And I've worked with groups who didn't succeed in the first year of their advocacy campaign, sometimes not the second year. It was the third or fourth year. You will be told no. You will be told that government can't do what you're asking. My advice to you is, government is in the business of saying no. Never accept no. No is not the answer. It's the start of a conversation and a negotiation. So never give up. There is always a way to achieve your goals. And believe in the power of patient advocacy. As I say, I've worked for big organizations and corporations, and I've worked with small health charities. I've seen the power of patient advocacy. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen it achieve great things. And when you work together, nothing is impossible. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to answer questions after, but I'm going to turn it, I think, either to Kelly or Patty, and I'm looking forward to what Patty has to say.
Great. I'm just trying to turn my video on. John, if you could, it's not allowing me. There we are. It's because I'm on video. Is everybody else on the webinar on video all the time? It's telling me, the computer is now telling me not to turn it on. So thanks so much, Michelle. It's really, really helpful. The context for what's happening in the political environment and what we can do really helps shape what we should be doing. And while getting TRIKAFTA through the system, and people on the webinar will know, is fraught with many challenges, there's also many opportunities for us to come together as a community, and we have before and continue to demand action now. Here at Cystic Fibrosis Canada, we've got a great and dedicated team working on government relations and advocacy. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about what we're doing before I hand it over to Patty. So at the provincial level, the team at CF Canada is pushing hard for immediate and broad coverage for CF modulators, including TRIKAFTA. Specifically, we're looking for a commitment from each provincial health minister to immediately list and fund TRIKAFTA, pending a positive Health Canada review, which, as Michelle said, we're anticipating for the end of June. To date, we've received commitments from Newfoundland and Labrador, Ontario, and PEI. And to secure the support of the other provinces, we're doing a few things. We're organizing provincial caucus meetings with representatives of all political parties based on a successful federal caucus model that we worked on last fall. We're engaging our CF Canada National Advocacy Network, and we're going to be providing you, our community, with tools to push for this commitment. At the federal level, we're pushing for a fast and fair process for access to drugs for rare diseases and precision medicines. And in short, an improved drug system that gets the medicines into the hands of the people who need them quickly and comprehensively. And we're working in partnership with all of you and our other partners in the CF community, CF Get Loud and CF Treatment Society, to ensure we have a unified voice. It is an uphill battle, but as Michelle said, we've seen remarkable progress as a result of our efforts. This was evidenced with the delayed implementation of the PMPRB guidelines, and that was a result of the advocacy work of this community last year. CF Canada and thousands of our members, many of you on this line today, called for the delay, and that happened. In addition to access to medicines, we've also been advocating for needed support during the pandemic. So from prioritization for shopping in grocery stores to more recently ensuring that our community is prioritized for the vaccine, we're ensuring that the CF community and your needs are top of mind for our policy and decision makers. And you can visit the COVID-19 section of our website to find out more, including information about vaccine prioritization. I also wanted to let you know that we're undertaking an important and historic study right now to understand the burden of care that CF imposes on individuals, families who are impacted by the disease, and our healthcare system. This includes the cost to the healthcare system and the savings when we have access to these needed treatments. This study will, of course, be so instrumental in our advocacy efforts. And finally, as Michelle talked about, there are some potential elections that we're anticipating, and Cystic Fibrosis Canada is ready to use the opportunities that elections can bring to draw attention to our access issues and to seek candidate commitments. And it's a wonderful opportunity because they will want to meet, they're more readily want to meet with us. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Patty Tweed, who is our provincial advocate for Manitoba. She's going to share with you her own experience as a CF mom and advocate and talk to you about the important role volunteer advocates play, what's coming up, and how you can get involved.
Thanks, Kelly. Hi, everyone. I'd like to begin my remarks by giving you a little bit of personal background. I'm going to be mentioning some of the same things that Michelle and Kelly have mentioned, but I will be speaking from the perspective of what this means to CF families and looking at the historical perspective of how long we have been working towards this. So while every CF family's experience is unique, I hope to just underline the heartfelt why behind our collective CF advocacy and the government relations that we are engaged in today. I'm the mom of a 38-year-old man who lives with cystic fibrosis. We're very thankful for Devon's good health today, and at the same time, we acknowledge the extensive and complex daily rituals that he and every CF person must stick to over a disciplined lifetime. Medicines and therapies, protocols and hospitalizations, peaks and valleys, scary times, and glimmers of hope. There's no doubt in my mind that people living with CF develop an uncommon level of grit and determination that is as much a part of their DNA as the defective gene that's at the heart of their health issues. I've been actively involved in cystic fibrosis community for 42 years. I was a pediatric dietitian and I worked in the cystic fibrosis clinic at Royal University Hospital in Saskatoon for several years before Devon was born. My husband and I did not know that we both carried the CF gene until Devon joined our family in 1983. To be honest, back then, I wished I didn't know as much as I did about CF. I just wanted to love my baby with all my might. Now, of course, I'm grateful for the inside knowledge I had of CF, particularly the very challenging nutritional component of the disease. Devon and I became a team right away. And with the support of our family, our clinic team, and our close friends, we were working together on a common goal to help Devon be the healthiest version of himself that he could possibly be. In both my head and my heart, I knew that nutrition and exercise were foundational pieces of his optimal health, and we set about to fuel his exceptional nutrition and activity needs together. I'm forever grateful for my husband's insistence that if our boys were going to play hockey, they would be excellent skaters. Countless hockey camps and skating drills were part of our life for many years. Seems to have paid off in developing Devon's lifelong love for a sport that he plays for fun, but also for health. Of course, there were other components to his wellness, but in my mind, feeding his body what it uniquely needed, not just more calories, but more nutrient-dense food and drink, would result in improved health parameters all around. More energy for exercise and physio, a more positive, upbeat attitude, well, at least most of the time, better sleep, better mental health, including better ability to self-soothe as a little guy, a school child, a teenager, and now an adult. It's been my experience that people living with CF are often old souls, displaying a wisdom that is developed in the crucible of this multifaceted disease. We became involved in advocacy very early on. It looked different back then because there were no wonder drugs available, but it was advocacy nonetheless. I think it's human nature when we feel helpless in the face of a huge challenge to grab onto a little piece that we can control. And so we did that, participating in our local CF chapter in various capacities, doing bake sales and meat draws, swimathons and Santa Sock, raising money wherever we could to support the science that would find a cure for CF. When our two sons were little, I would reassure them by saying, parts of the cure are here now. Devon needs to keep himself as healthy as he can to receive each new part of the cure as it comes along. Some of those parts of the cure that I was referring to were the enteric-coated enzymes. They're part of the cure. So much more effective at helping to absorb food than the old shotgun method of swallowing mega handfuls of pills, hoping that some of the enzymes in the capsules would make it through the stomach acid and far enough down the GI tract to help CF sufferers get the good out of their food. New and improved methods of airway clearance are part of the cure. Specialized antibiotics to do battle in the inner landscape of the CF respiratory system. Imagine how hopeful we and our CF friends were across Canada to learn that the science we had supported with endless bake sales and some generous benefactors was beginning to hit pay dirt, with much of the research carried out right here in Canada. How well I remember the tears of joy in 1989 when Dr. Lap Chi Choi and his team discovered the CF gene. Surely a cure would not be far behind. Fast forward several decades. The research is ongoing. It no longer focuses only on symptom management, though, which is a huge step forward. Gene modulators came on the scene, drugs that target the basic CF defect at the cellular level, biologics with the power to alter the trajectory of this fatal disease. Kalydeco, Orkambi, Symdeko, and now Trikafta and beyond are available and are changing lives in enlightened countries around the world. So Canada is an enlightened country, right? A G7 country, by definition, a major industrial democracy, a leader on the world stage. Surely Canada would be a leader in dealing with a life and death issue affecting its citizens, a humanitarian issue affecting some 4,400 Canadians and their loved ones. Sadly not. Canada lags behind many other developed countries. To put this in perspective, Trikafta, a new transformational drug that can treat up to 90% of people with cystic fibrosis, was fast-tracked for access by the US Federal Drug Agency, the FDA, and the European Medicine Agency, the EMA. Trikafta has received regulatory approval in 32 countries and counting, 27 within the EMA centralized regulatory approval, in addition to receiving approval in the United States, United Kingdom, Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. Trikafta has received public reimbursement in the United States, United Kingdom, Ireland, Austria, Denmark, Germany, and Slovenia. The Canadian drug access system is broken. It needs help in coming into the 21st century of precision medicines. These medicines take a great deal of research money and years of time to develop, yet in the end may be applicable to only a small segment of the population. Hence, the old cost-benefit analysis is abysmally lacking. Applying a typical financial lens to look at this equation might lead to a conclusion that there isn't enough benefit to warrant the cost. That is, unless it's your child or you who can breathe better, who can sleep better, who can possibly go back to work or school, who can have fewer hospital admissions or none at all. As Kelly mentioned earlier, CF Canada has undertaken a burden of disease study that will examine the financial, socioeconomic, and mental health costs of a lifetime of cystic fibrosis, both in terms of time and money. By establishing the real direct and indirect costs of cystic fibrosis, the results of this study, which may be the most comprehensive study of its kind on cystic fibrosis in the world, will flesh out a much larger scope of cost than mere dollars and cents to pay for a relatively expensive drug. Costs to the individual, the family, the government, and society. There are approximately 250 trained and passionate advocates in Cystic Fibrosis Canada's National Advocacy Network, supported by a remarkable team in government relations and advocacy at CF Canada. They in turn are part of a larger coalition called CORD, Canadian Organization for Rare Disorders. Together, we're advocating to bring the Canadian drug access process into the 21st century. Science is delivering cures and state-of-the-art treatments for rare diseases that we could only dream of in decades past. We in the CF community have taken it upon ourselves to make some noise and make our needs known across the country, and to help our elected officials to bring about the humanitarian change in priorities that must go along with innovative treatments and cures that are on our doorstep now. Our focus for advocacy right now is on improving access to CF medicines, both disease-modifying medicines and symptom management drugs. An application for review of Trikafta was received by Health Canada and accepted for 180-day priority review on December 23rd, as Michelle mentioned. The bodies that evaluate cost effectiveness for the drug, including the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health, or CADTH, and the Quebec body, ANES, have officially started their review of Trikafta, which indicates that the drug is undergoing an expedited review. CADTH's website currently says that the draft recommendation issued to the manufacturer will be between June 28th and June 30th, 2021. And the Health Canada approval decision is expected on June 23rd. While this is promising news in terms of regulatory and health technology reviews of the drug, Trikafta still needs public plans across the country to negotiate price and list the drug before it will actually be in the hands of patients. We're advocating for all our provincial governments to work with our federal and provincial public drug programs through the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance, or the PCPA, to include Trikafta as part of the current price negotiations for Orkambi and Kalydeco. We need each of our provincial governments to make commitments to expedite Trikafta through PCPA negotiations and provide immediate public listing for Trikafta and the other CF medicines. We've come very far, but there's still a lot of work to do. Michelle mentioned the documents on our website, and I want to underline that, draw your attention to the briefing notes and the template letters available on the CF Canada website for meetings with provincial and federal elected officials. One exciting initiative we're launching in lead up to May CF Awareness Month is the Provincial Meeting Challenge. Through this initiative, we're challenging everyone in our community and others to meet with their provincial elected officials, calling on them to reimburse CF modulators quickly and comprehensively. Stay tuned for more information. For those interested in joining the National Cystic Fibrosis Advocacy Network, we always welcome new advocates. For further information on becoming an advocate, or if you have questions, please contact us at advocacy@cysticfibrosis.ca. It's one of the greatest privileges of my life to work closely with the passionate people in the CF community and in CF Canada, and to see the humanitarian response in many elected officials once they become aware of this crisis and the fact that a severely broken Canadian drug access system is costing people their lives. We're confident that our work to date and our partnership with all party caucuses of elected officials across the country will result in speedy approval going forward through Canadian and provincial bodies, and in turn will result in fast and fair access to life-changing medicines for Canadians who desperately need them. Kelly?
Thanks so much, Patty. That was so great. And I thank you so much for your ongoing commitment and your friendship to us and to the community. It's just, we're so lucky to work with you, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm just sorry to everyone on the line. I'm just going to my notes here, make sure I'm at the right spot. Okay, so we are going to take a few questions now. We had some questions sent in, so I'm going to start with those. And our first question, Patty, is for you. So you talked a little bit about it now, Patty, but maybe you could just tell us, why did you join Cystic Fibrosis Canada's National Advocacy Network? And what has your experience with the network been like?
Well, I've always needed to know what's happening, and I can't think of a better way to know what's going on with something as near and dear to my heart as to join the advocacy network and find out where I might be able to lend my shoulder to the wheel as well, but to get to work with some of the most amazing people that I've ever met, quite frankly. And so it's been just a real privilege to do that. And we all have the same goal in mind. And I've had a chance to meet just virtually in some of the Facebook pages, some of the other parents. And what we really realize is that there's so much that doesn't need to be said when you all have a similar experience in the CF community. So we start without having to go through all of the niceties of, talking about the weather. We just get right down to it and talk about what's really important in our families' lives, and it's just been a really rich experience for me.
That's wonderful. Michelle, this is for you. What advice would you give to a loved one with CF to help get Trikafta covered?
To get involved with CF Canada. I think the resources and the support you need are there, and the team can support you in sharing your story. Canadian politicians need to understand the impact of our healthcare system at an individual level, and you're the way to bring that story. There is no more effective briefing than, even hearing Patty's story tonight. So my advice is get involved with CF Canada. They're making a tremendous difference, and every voice matters.
Thanks, Michelle. And it is true, your stories make a difference, and they're really important. So I just want to remind people, some of you have done that, but if you have any questions, please put them into the question box there, and our team will forward them to us. So Patty, you did talk, the next question's for you. You did talk a little bit about this. So maybe you can go over it again a little bit on what the National Advocacy Network is doing now to press provincial and federal governments for public coverage of Trikafta when it becomes available.
Well, there's so many facets to that. And I remember when I first started learning about all of the components that need to fit together from Kim, it just seemed pretty complicated. And I thought, how am I ever going to figure all of these pieces out? But we have been working at the federal level with our MPs, but also with a very effective all-party caucus. And now we're using that model to implement a similar kind of structure in a number of the provinces. And just once we get a sense of who's with us, because you can pretty quickly get a sense when you meet with politicians of whether or not they're going to be an active supporter of what we're doing. So we are certainly in the process of that. And as far as kind of bridging the gap between the federal and the provincial, that's been a question that's, buzzed around in my head for a long time, but it's now starting to kind of come together and the way that I envision things is often in pictures. And what I picture is this is a whole orchestra. And right now, the pieces that are playing their parts are Health Canada and CADTH and INESS, those decision-making bodies. And what we need to do is to have all of the rest of the orchestra sitting in their chairs, ready to go when in June, when that piece of it is finished, so that there's no gap in the time frame. Everybody is already primed and ready to go, and they know what their part is, and they're prepared to play it. So.
It's a great way to put it, Patty. It's a really, really great way. I think also, you certainly, we have objectives and plans, but I do find in advocacy best laid plans, because the next thing you know, something quickly happens. And I think what's been great about our volunteers or our advocates and our strategy is we've remained nimble as well. So. Okay, I'm going to turn to some of the questions we received. And Michelle, I think this would be best for you. The question is, they want to clarify this or asking if this is correct. Because of the arm's length approach, the approvals process will not change regardless of which government is elected in May or October. So that would be probably the approvals process for Trikafta that they're speaking of there.
Right. So I'm going to answer it in two ways. The spring or fall election is federal, and they're right. No matter which party is elected, the federal bodies are truly arm's length from political decision makers. But that's not to say that they are immune from pressure, and PMPRB is a great example of that. But where the next real decision point, because I have every confidence that both Health Canada and CADTH will recommend Trikafta. This is then going to move to a provincial level for a reimbursement decision, and first a negotiation by PCPA, and then those individual decisions. So politicians will tell you that it's out of their hands, but there are more cases than I can name where governments have felt the pressure from a community to make a drug available and have acted accordingly. So yes, it's constructed, the system is constructed to be arm's length from government, but no government is immune from pressure when it's brought effectively as the CF community can. So share your voice. You can create the pressure that will make the difference on those approvals and essentially the reimbursement listing decisions at the provincial level.
Great. So this is a question, I think, to me, but I'm going to ask some others as well. So I mentioned that Ontario has made a commitment to fund Trikafta upon Health Canada approval. And the question is, do we still need to work with provincial MPPs in Ontario? It's a really good question. I want to give some context. So we also know that MPP Jim Wilson, who's been a great advocate, said that Minister Elliott told him that that Ontario would move quickly to ensure that CF modulators are available on the Ontario drug benefit list post successful PCPA negotiations. And she said February 2021, I can assure you that as soon as the final approvals are obtained, we'll move quickly to ensure all three products, Trikafta, Orkambi, and Kalydeco, get onto the formulary. I'm going to take a stab at this, and I'm going to see what Michelle and Patty think of this, but I would say that's great she said that, but we have to keep the pressure on there to make sure she lives up to her word. You're muted, Michelle.
Patty, do you want to weigh in before I do?
Well, I think we always have to keep the pressure on. I think that's just vital because it's human nature to, once the pressure's off, to just kind of ease up a little, and we can't have that.
Yeah, and I'm going to be a little more cynical than Patty is and say that governments, when they're responding to these type of questions, their instinct is to reassure people. But we have to ensure that governments, when they're faced with that decision, actually do the right thing. Yeah. And that, in this instance, when you're talking about approvals for a novel therapy, you really do have to keep the pressure up on government. And it's not that they don't want to do the right thing. I want to be clear. But remember that laundry list of priorities that I showed in my slide deck. Governments are balancing a lot. And what we have to impress upon government is in all the issues they're managing, this has to be at the top of their list. And that's really what you can do when you're advocating, is to keep that issue front and center so that governments can't look away and say, well, I'm busy over here. There isn't anything more important to our community, and we need to ensure that there's nothing more important to government.
Great, thank you. So someone has said, wonderful presentation, so thank you for that. Can someone speak a bit about how the clinical team fits into advocacy and how we can engage them to help our advocacy efforts? So I'll speak first just about what we've done, and then I'd be interested in both of your perspectives on the importance of that. So we do work closely with our clinical community when it comes to access to drugs. Or to treatments, and they've joined our advocates in meetings. They've written an open letter in the fall to the federal health minister, and they're working on standards of care for the use of modulators. And they also wrote, we had 2 submissions to for CADTH, which is not so much government relations, but a piece of this. Maybe Michelle, if you want to speak to that as a strategy, and Patty, what your experience has been, and whether Michelle's answer is good.
So Patty, be kind, but my answer is this: clinicians are very effective advocates. I think we all have a trust and a deference that we pay to our medical professionals, and governments are the same. So they're very effective in providing a clinical perspective that families cannot. They can speak to the evidence. They can situate Trikafta as the breakthrough drug that it is. Because again, for a lot of politicians, they don't have a medical background, and they are always hearing claims of, this is the new blockbuster drug. When our clinicians can situate what this means for CF patients, it's hard to really quibble with the idea that it needs to be made available very quickly to Canadian patients. Where I've seen clinicians most effectively used is when they are part of a comprehensive advocacy team like CF Canada. So I've seen them go in with patients and with policy experts. So they're, I think, most effective in a team setting, but they can bring perspective to decision makers and almost a sense of reassurance that this is clinically significant and should be done. Patty, has that been your experience as well?
Yes, certainly. And there are two of the provincial advocates who sit on the Health Advisory Council, which is the national group of physicians, CF physicians, Sandy Stevens and I. And we have had the opportunity to have conversation with the clinicians. They are developing standards of care, and they, as you mentioned, Kelly wrote a letter. We've just really encouraged them to claim their professional authority, because it's really, we want them to know how much impact they do have. And so we're very grateful to them for that. We know they're very, very busy taking care of our people, but we also need them to have a strong voice. And Dr. Tullis did a wonderful job last February of doing the news conference. That holds a lot of weight. And so we're very thankful for what they do.
We sure are. Michelle, this is a question for you. Often the opposition is all for you until they get into government, and then they don't do anything. You haven't seen that, Michelle. Any tips on combating this behavior in the ever-present political game? And somebody wrote, sometimes I feel like a pawn.
Wow, that's a fair comment. And you'll see it most in an election year, where promises, frankly, can be cheap and easy. The real devil, of course, is in the doing. So listen, there's no way to completely correct that situation. Again, people have good instincts. They actually most people go into politics and are in government because they want to make a difference. And when you're in opposition, you haven't faced some of the challenges that governing brings. So they are, I expect, with all good intention, making those commitments. But that's why you need to keep the pressure up, but also build a relationship. So build a relationship with these people so that when they do form government, that they know your issues, they remember you, they remember why it's important to put your issue at the top of their list. So my advice to you is, don't see government relations only as a transactional relationship. You're building relationships for the long term, because right now our issue is having modulators made available. But in 5 years, we'll have a different issue that we want governments to act on. So see the long term and not the short term only. Build those relationships, and that will serve you very well in the long term.
Great. We've got 4 questions, and we've got 2 minutes. I'm going to try and do it and get to it. So the first one I'm going to answer quickly. There's a question about PCPA and a question if Trikafta had officially been added to the current ongoing negotiations. We don't know. Many of us have had sense that that could be the case, but we don't know, and that they will never disclose that to us until it's all said and done. And I don't even think they'll disclose it then. We'll just see the results of that. When Michelle, when politicians feel pressured with issues, what do you do when they say to you, it's out of our hands? There's nothing I can do. The drug approval process is based on evidence.
Kelly will remember me telling her this many years ago. I said to her after a meeting, and we were told no about a different file. And I said, this is Ottawa, this is government. No is their version of hello. Don't let that stop your conversation. You're still in negotiation. I've been told no more times than I can count. And I'll tell you, I have won more than I've lost. So persistence is the key to the game. No is never a final answer. There is always a way to come at that issue a different way.
Okay, I'm going to try and combine these two in the interest of time. Lots of people on the calls have amazing relationships with their MPs, their MPPs, their MLAs. What action steps should they do right now when they have those good relationships? I'm not doing the part B. I'll wait till you answer that.
For me?
Either of you.
Patty, do you want to take that one?
Well, I think just keep them informed. Keep taking them into your confidence and making sure that they're updated and that they see themselves as part of our team. Because yes, there have been some really wonderful relationships built, and we want to keep those. We don't want to have absence from that, so that they forget about us and go on to something else. So we keep that up.
Answer.
Yeah.
Great answer. Michelle, the final one's for you. Besides advocacy with MPPs out there, are there any other methods you'd recommend for pressuring fast tracking of provincial reimbursement?
Absolutely. Communications. So when you're dealing directly with government, that's creating a certain level of pressure. Create it publicly as well. Share your story on social media. Write into your local paper. Share an opinion editorial, a letter to the editor. Keep the pressure up in the public limelight. That brings pressure on government in a unique way. It's hard for them in an election year to deal with that public scrutiny. So share your story publicly.
And the last note before, thank you. The last note, there's a member on here whose child has been on Trikafta and they want to help show her progress and the dramatic benefits of the drug. And I would say I'll try of sharing that in a meeting. Volumes. You'll look online of the before and after when people have been on the drug. Those stories and that what you can bring alive with your elected representatives. Honestly, I didn't believe it before I started this work, and now I believe it. It can make a difference, and it takes one person to yell, and things can get changed. Reimbursed and moved faster. It only takes one person. I drank Michelle's Kool-Aid. She trained me and I'm there. So I want to thank our panelists so much. What a wonderful conversation the two of you have and ideas you've given to our community. There's never enough time for these things. So to those of you on the line, there were other advice for webinars that you've given us, and we will take those into consideration. And Patty, thank you so much for everything you do for us. Hope to see you in person soon. And Michelle, thank you everything you've done for us as well. You've done so much to position us, and thanks so much to you. And I hope to see you in person in 2021. I saw vaccines at my hospital today, so that was exciting. So thank you to our community for everything you do and for being a part of this today.
Thanks so much, Kelly.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.